She had her daughter's tiny body crushed on her chest, blood pooled in her lap. And the vodka bottle? Empty. Shattered beside the twisted steering wheel. But no one saw it coming. Not even the ones who knew her best. Welcome to Through Crime, your portal into the most chilling true crime cases, unsolved mysteries, and the darkest corners of criminal history. Don't forget to like, share, and comment on this video, and if you are new here, do well to hit the subscribe button. We dig deep into the facts, uncover shocking twists, and explore the theories that keep investigators and the world on edge. Stay back and enjoy. July 26, 2009. A beautiful summer Sunday that would end in screams, flames, and funerals. That morning, Diane Schuler, a 36-year-old supermom, loaded 5 kids into her minivan at the Hunter Lake campground in upstate New York. Her husband, Daniel Schuler, drove a separate car, headed home early with their dog. Diane, always in control, was the kind of woman who juggled a high-stress job, cooked every meal from scratch, and never, not ever, missed a school event. She was the kind of woman people trusted with their children. But that Sunday afternoon, Diane drove the wrong way on the Taconic State Parkway for 1.7 miles, 85 miles per hour, before slamming head-on into an SUV. 8 people died, 3 men in the SUV, Diane herself, her 2-year-old daughter, and 3 of her nieces. Only one child survived, the lone 5-year-old, Brian, her son. The media called it a highway horror. But it was only when the toxicology report came back that the real horror began. Diane had more than twice the legal limit of alcohol in her system, equivalent to 10 shots of vodka, and high levels of THC from marijuana. Her stomach still held undigested alcohol. There was an empty bottle of Absolut found near the driver's seat. Yet her husband Daniel stood by her, stone-faced and furious, insisting to the media, she wasn't an alcoholic. She didn't drink like that. They got it wrong. Something else happened. But it was what he didn't say that made people uneasy. Diane was more than just a mom. She was a perfectionist. Friends described her as intense, controlling, and secretive. Her niece Emma once joked, Aunt Diane could run a prison with a smile. But behind that tight-lipped smile was a storm no one saw coming. The morning of the crash, campground security footage showed Diane laughing and hugging the kids. She bought gas, paid cash, and chatted casually with the clerk. But around 11:30 a.m., something changed. Her nieces called their father, Diane's brother, sounding scared. There's something wrong with Aunt Diane, one of the girls whispered into the phone. Diane had pulled over at a gas station and asked for painkillers. The clerk said she looked dazed. Moments later, she was seen vomiting by the roadside. Then she vanished from traffic cameras, until reappearing going the wrong way, accelerating. But here's where things get dark. After the crash, investigators visited the Schuler home. What they found disturbed them. In the kitchen cabinet, multiple bottles of vodka. Hidden. Half full. In Diane's medical records, a history of untreated dental pain, migraines, and reports of anxiety. She hadn't been to a doctor in years. And in her phone records, dozens of calls to a number registered under Daniel's name, all made in the 2 hours before the crash. When questioned again, Daniel cracked. He admitted Diane drank occasionally. Then, in a whisper, he added, sometimes she used marijuana to sleep, but only at night. The truth was beginning to emerge. Diane Schuler had been self-medicating for years. Her pristine life, the picture-perfect motherhood, it was a front. But why was she drinking that day? Why with 5 children in the car? A month after the crash, Diane's sister-in-law, Jay, received a voicemail from Diane left moments before the crash. The message was chilling. Diane was slurring, crying, saying she couldn't see properly. Then, silence. Just heavy breathing and the sound of children crying in the background. Jay handed it over to investigators. But Daniel didn't want it public. That's when Jay went rogue. She began her own investigation. Interviews. Documents. She hired a private toxicologist who confirmed the autopsy's findings. She even visited the crash site every week for a year, placing flowers and retracing Diane's final drive. Her conclusion? Diane Schuler was not the perfect woman the family had painted her to be. She was in pain, emotionally and physically, and no one wanted to talk about it. 2 years later, a documentary titled There's Something Wrong with Aunt Diane aired on HBO. The footage showed Daniel deflecting every theory that pointed toward Diane's substance use. She had a stroke, he insisted. She was sick. The test was wrong. She didn't drink that day. But viewers weren't buying it. They watched as Daniel refused to acknowledge even the possibility that Diane had snapped under pressure. His denial wasn't just about grief. It felt like guilt. Then came the final blow. A family friend anonymously leaked a voicemail from Diane to Daniel, dated 2 weeks before the crash. "I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. I'm not okay." Daniel never shared that voicemail with police, or with the families of the other victims. With public opinion turning, the families of the 3 men killed in the SUV sued Daniel for wrongful death. The surviving son, Brian, now severely disabled, became a symbol of the tragedy. Daniel filed a countersuit. But the damage was done. He lost his job, his home. The private life he had tried so hard to protect became public spectacle. He stopped giving interviews. And for the first time, Diane wasn't the only one being questioned. People began to ask, what did Daniel know? And why did he keep silent? There were no arrests, no trial, no prison sentence. But there was a reckoning. Diane's name, once associated with PDA meetings and bake sales, became shorthand for betrayal and buried secrets. 8 people died. 1 child lived, with scars too deep to measure. And Daniel? He faded into obscurity, still defending a woman who, by all appearances, had destroyed everything. The truth is this: sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones fighting the darkest battles. But denial can kill. And silence? It can bury more than just a reputation. It can bury lives. In 2021, more than a decade later, Diane Schuler, now 17, filed to access sealed medical records from the crash, documents his father had kept hidden. What he found inside changed everything he thought he knew about his mother and about his father. Because someone else was in that car before the crash, and they might still be alive. The blood test said she was drunk. The crash said she was reckless. But Brian's discovery? It said something much, much worse. Aunt Diane may not have been alone in that van after all. 12 years later, 2021, Diane Schuler was no longer a wide-eyed 5-year-old clinging to a neck brace and tubes. At 17, he carried a scar across his jaw, a limp in his right leg, and a void in his memory. He remembered flashes, trees whipping past, screams from the back seat, his mother gripping the wheel, her face flushed red, pupils wide and wild. But something new had started to creep in. A sound. A voice. Whispering something he couldn't quite make out. Something that didn't belong to his mother or any of the kids in the car. After years of therapy and battling PTSD, Brian finally asked his Uncle Warren, one of Diane's surviving brothers, the question no one dared speak aloud. Was someone else in the car? Warren blinked. No. Why would you ask that? But Brian had already begun his own search. Through legal channels and with the help of his therapist and a determined investigative journalist named Kelly Rojas, he requested sealed documents from the crash report, photographs, GPS logs, dash camera footage from highway patrol, and most importantly, the EMS field notes from the first responders on the scene. What they found was chilling. One EMT's handwritten note read, "Minivan, 2 adults, 5 minors at impact. 1 male adult ejected prior to arrival. DOA not recovered, presumed hit and run from other vehicle." This line had never been referenced in court, never made it to the media. In the final report, it was crossed out, redacted. But Brian's heart dropped. 2 adults? The theory that had circulated back in 2009, that Diane had picked someone up on the road, possibly a hitchhiker, or met with someone unknown, had been shut down by Daniel and dismissed by investigators. But now, it looked like someone had been there, and then disappeared. Kelly Rojas dug deeper. Phone records showed an incoming call to Diane's phone at 11:52 a.m., just moments before the kids called their father saying, "There's something wrong with Aunt Diane." The number was registered to a prepaid burner phone, activated 2 days before the crash, in the same area where Diane had spent the weekend camping with the kids. Brian stared at the number. It meant nothing to him. Until Kelly traced it to a nearby gas station's security feed from the morning of the crash. Diane was there, visibly distressed, speaking to someone off camera. A tall man in a ball cap. His face was never caught, but his build and walk were eerily familiar. That's when Kelly froze the frame. Behind Diane, a white van. Parked in the background. A logo on the side. Schuler and Company Drywall Specialists. Daniel's old business. Daniel had said he left the campground early to avoid traffic. But GPS records from his personal truck showed he had never left the vicinity until nearly noon, just after the fatal call came in from the kids. And more damning, a neighbor remembered seeing Daniel's van return to the house late that night, with the passenger seat missing. When asked about the discrepancy, Daniel stammered, "Must have moved some tools." But Brian didn't believe him anymore. He confronted his father. "You were with her, weren't you? That morning. What did you say to her?" Daniel didn't answer. He just walked away. Kelly uncovered even more. Diane had been threatening to leave. Not just Daniel, but the whole family. She had found messages on Daniel's phone. Another woman. Possibly more. There were also signs that Diane had found something darker, suspicious financial records, large withdrawals, missing retirement funds. Her boss had noted that Diane seemed distracted, stressed in the months before the crash. She may have planned to expose everything, but she never got the chance. One theory began to emerge, one that no one dared say in 2009. What if Diane didn't just snap? What if she was pushed? What if someone she trusted, poured the vodka, lit the joint, and let her spiral? Or worse, what if someone else was behind the wheel for part of that journey? Brian, racked with confusion and rage, returned to the crash site. He stood where the minivan had spun across the parkway, its frame obliterated by steel and fire. And he remembered. Not everything. Just one word. Stop. A man's voice. Sir. Urgent. Panicked. Not Diane's. In early 2022, Brian and Kelly filed a formal petition to reopen the case based on new evidence. The state declined, citing insufficient grounds. But the Schuler family was never the same. Daniel moved out of state, cut off contact, refused to speak to Brian. And Brian? He started his own podcast, Wrong Way, The Truth About Aunt Diane, where he shared what he'd uncovered, piece by piece. Each episode ended the same way. If you were there that day, if you saw the van, if you knew my mother, it's time to talk. Someone out there still knows the truth. Brian received an anonymous message. No name, no number, just a distorted voice, digitally altered. She didn't crash that van, Brian. He did. I saw it. I was there. Attached to the message? A photograph. Blurry, but unmistakable. A man in a ball cap, standing beside Diane at the campground, with his hand on her shoulder. And the timestamp? 7:43 a.m., the day of the crash. The last person seen with Aunt Diane before the crash wasn't her husband. But he knew who it was. And now, someone's ready to talk. But the truth is darker than anyone imagined. 2023, Brooklyn, New York. Brian Schuler stared at the printed photo on his desk. Blurry, grainy, likely pulled from an old surveillance tape. But there was no mistaking the woman in the center, Diane Schuler. Next to her, slightly turned away, was a tall man in a navy ball cap, his hand resting firmly on Diane's shoulder. The photo had been emailed anonymously, along with a voice message that still echoed in Brian's head. She didn't crash that van, Brian. He did. I saw it. I was there. The photograph was timestamped 7:43 a.m., the day of the crash, just before Diane left the campground with 5 kids. Brian immediately forwarded the image to Kelly Rojas, the investigative journalist who had helped him uncover the inconsistencies in the crash report. Together, they tracked down every employee working at Hunter Lake Campground that summer. Out of 12 former staff members, one finally responded, Jared Palmer, a groundskeeper who had worked seasonal jobs around the area. When they showed Jared the photo, his face turned pale. I remember that guy, he said. Came up here a few times. Always with Diane. But not like a family thing. More like private talks. Intense. Like he was mad at her. Brian's stomach dropped. Do you remember his name? Jared hesitated. No. But I remember his truck. Old Ford, blue, rusted doors. He had one of those Schuler and Company magnets on the side. They pulled DMV records. Only 2 Schuler Company vehicles matched the description. One had been scrapped in 2010. The other? Registered under Mike Russo, Daniel Schuler's cousin and business partner. Until 2008, when he suddenly quit and disappeared from the business altogether. Public records showed Russo had filed for bankruptcy in 2009. He'd also been arrested for DUI just months before the crash and quietly bailed out by Daniel. Brian confronted his father again. You knew she was meeting Mike. Daniel didn't deny it this time. She was asking questions about the company's books. She didn't understand what we had to do to keep the business afloat. Mike told her to drop it. She wouldn't. He paused, then added quietly, "She threatened to go to the IRS." Diane had stumbled onto something bigger than anyone thought. Kelly and Brian tracked down old financial records buried deep in public filings and noticed something strange: massive cash withdrawals made by Daniel and Mike between 2007 and 2009. Tens of thousands of dollars with no paper trail on where it went. It looked like they were laundering money through the drywall business, possibly even for local construction crews tied to organized crime in Yonkers. Diane had been the bookkeeper, and the minute she started asking questions, everything changed. Kelly dug into accident records near the Taconic Parkway crash site and found a report that had never been followed up on. At 12:58 p.m., a witness named Elias Ford had called 911 to report a man in a baseball cap walking away from the woods near the northbound ramp. It was minutes after the crash. But when they tried to reach Elias, he was gone. No current address. No social media. No work history after 2010. Vanished. It was as if someone wanted him gone. Then came the breakthrough. Kelly managed to extract deleted voicemails from Diane's old cell phone SIM card, found in evidence archives. One message was left at 7:15 a.m., the day of the crash. "Diane, we need to talk. Don't do anything stupid. I'll meet you by the gas station. Just you. Leave the kids with your brother. This doesn't need to go that far." The voice? Pressured. They sent the audio to a forensic lab. It matched Mike Russo's arrest footage voiceprint from 2009. Brian and Kelly now had a working theory. Diane had planned to confront Mike about the illegal finances. Maybe record the conversation. But instead, something happened, something violent. Maybe she was forced to drink. Maybe threatened. Maybe even drugged. And someone, probably Mike, was in that car at some point. Possibly even during the final minutes. But here's where it gets truly twisted. Daniel had known all along. He knew Diane was unraveling because of what she had uncovered. He knew Mike had threatened her. He knew about the confrontation. He didn't stop it. He didn't warn her. He didn't protect her. And afterward, he helped Mike disappear. To protect the business. To protect himself. And in doing so, he left 5 children in that van with a woman on the brink, while the man who pushed her there walked away from the crash. Literally. Brian made one final move. He handed everything, the voicemails, the photos, the financials, to the New York State Attorney General's office in a sealed file. As of 2024, the case has been quietly reopened under a new designation: felony conspiracy and involuntary manslaughter, cold case review. An arrest warrant has been issued for Michael Russo, last seen in South Florida in 2015 under an alias. And Daniel? He's now under investigation for obstruction of justice. The truth has a nasty habit of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it. Secrets rot. And when they explode, they don't just burn one life. They take everyone around them. If you love someone, tell them the truth, even if it hurts, because silence kills. 6 weeks after submitting the case, Brian received another envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph of Diane from that last day, taken from inside a car. On the back, scribbled in Sharpie, "She never made it to the gas station." And beneath it, a location: Florida Keys. Diane never made it to the gas station because someone made sure she didn't. And now, 14 years later, the trail leads to a tropical paradise hiding a killer in plain sight. The postcard had no stamp, just coordinates scrawled on the back and one line in blocky capital letters. She never made it to the gas station. Diane Schuler stared at the photo for hours before showing it to Kelly. It was Diane, no doubt, taken candidly, likely that morning. Her eyes red, puffy, her lips tight. She looked afraid. Someone had taken this from inside a car. The angle was too close, too personal. Kelly traced the coordinates to a small marina in Key Largo, a town known for retirees, tourists, and people looking to disappear. Mike Russo had officially gone off the grid in 2010. No taxes, no licenses, no activity on his Social Security. But Kelly's contact in the U.S. Marshal Service found something strange. A man named Mark Renshaw, matching Mike's age and description, had been renting a boat slip under a cash-only agreement for almost 6 years. He lived aboard a houseboat, a 1978 Hatteras docked on the far edge of the marina. Kelly and Diane flew to Florida without alerting authorities. They wanted to see him first. And when they did, there was no question. Mike Russo was alive. They waited until dusk. Diane approached first, heart pounding, a small camera clipped to his shirt collar. Kelly stayed back with binoculars and her recorder rolling. Mike opened the cabin door wearing khaki shorts, sunglasses, and a smug grin. "Took you long enough," he said. Diane froze. "So it was you." Mike didn't deny it. He just shrugged and turned back inside. "Might as well come in. Storm's coming." Mike poured a drink, vodka neat, and sat across from Diane like it was just another Tuesday. "She wouldn't listen," he said calmly. "She was going to take us down. Me, Dennis, everyone. We had families. Workers. People relying on that company." He took a sip. "So yeah, I told her to back off. She didn't." Diane clenched his fists. "Did you drug her? Did you force her to drive like that?" Mike smiled faintly. "You think I wanted those kids dead? Gisa, that wasn't the plan. The plan was to scare her. Remind her who she was dealing with. But she broke." He looked out the window, suddenly quiet. She was screaming, pounding the wheel. She couldn't breathe. She begged me to get out of the van. Said I was making it worse. "Why didn't you stop her?" Mike looked at Diane for the first time, really looked at him. "Because I was a coward." According to Mike, Diane had picked him up that morning after his call. They parked near the gas station. He confronted her about the missing financial documents she had copied. She refused to hand them over. Told him she was taking them to a lawyer. "She lost it," he said. Started chugging from the bottle. "I didn't even bring it. She already had it in the car. Maybe she planned to use it. Maybe she thought it would calm her down." He begged her to pull over. She refused. She said, "If I go down, we all go down." At some point, Mike demanded she stop the van and let him out. And she did. Somewhere along Route 17. He walked off. Called Daniel. "Dan told me to disappear." Daniel had helped Mike escape, paid for the boat, sent monthly cash for years to keep him off the radar. In return, Mike stayed silent. Until now. "Dan's broke," Mike said with a bitter chuckle. "Guess I'm not worth protecting anymore." Kelly got it all on tape. Every word. They turned the footage over to the New York Attorney General's office within 48 hours. Mike Russo was arrested on the dock 2 days later, charged with obstruction of justice, tampering with a crime scene, conspiracy to commit manslaughter, and involuntary manslaughter for his role in the deaths of the children. Daniel Schuler was served a subpoena. His public image, carefully crafted for 15 years, collapsed overnight. Brian didn't speak to him. Not yet. There were still too many unanswered questions. 2 weeks after Mike's arrest, Kelly received a small manila envelope at her office. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. On it, scans of Diane's missing documents, invoices, statements, and emails, and one audio file. Diane's voice. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. I want my kids safe. I want Brian to know I tried." Her voice cracked. "I think they're planning something. I don't know what. But I'm scared." The state formally closed the Taconic Wrongway crash case in early 2025, labeling it a criminally negligent homicide, a cover-up fueled by money, betrayal, and cowardice. Brian finally had closure, but not peace. At the end of Diane's recording, there was a brief pause. Then another voice, whispering, "You'll keep your mouth shut, or your family won't be the only ones to burn." Kelly enhanced the audio. It wasn't Mike. It wasn't Daniel. It was someone else. Someone still out there. And in the background, the sound of children laughing. The man who helped cover up the crash is behind bars. The financial trail is exposed. Diane's voice has finally been heard. But there's one problem: she was afraid of someone else. And now he knows she's been heard. 2025, Albany, New York. The courtroom was silent as the prosecution played the last 90 seconds of Diane Schuler's voice memo. "I think they're planning something. I don't know what. But I'm scared." Then the whisper followed. "You'll keep your mouth shut, or your family won't be the only ones to burn." The room froze. The voice didn't match Mike Russo or Daniel Schuler, but it was clear someone else had been involved. Someone more dangerous. Brian sat stone-faced in the front row. That voice haunted him. He knew it, deep in his bones. Kelly Rojas, the journalist who had helped unravel this entire case, kept digging. She re-examined the founding documents of Schuler and Company, the drywall business Diane had helped run with Daniel and Mike. That's when she noticed a name she hadn't seen before. Anthony Tony DeSpirito, listed in early tax records as a silent partner. His name disappeared from documents after 2005. Tony was no stranger to the law. A known associate of the Luciano crime family, he had done time in the late 90s for construction fraud. And now, he was a retired consultant living in upstate New York, in a mansion paid for in full. According to cell phone tower pings and financial records, Tony had been at the Hunter Lake campground the weekend Diane died. His name had never come up in the official investigation. No interviews. No mentions. Nothing. But there was one link. He was Daniel's cousin. And he owned the property Diane and the kids were camping on. Brian's blood ran cold as Kelly laid it out. Mike and Daniel were the money guys. But Tony? He was the one who made people stay silent. If Diane had discovered the embezzlement scheme and the money laundering and had tried to go to the authorities, Tony would have been the one called in to handle it. Diane had known. That whisper on the tape wasn't a threat from a scared businessman. It was a death sentence from a man who'd buried bodies before. Kelly submitted a Freedom of Information request for unreleased traffic camera footage from the Taconic crash area. Most of it was useless, except for one clip, time-stamped 11:50 a.m., about an hour before the crash. It showed Diane's minivan pulling off onto a wooded rest area. A second vehicle, a black Lincoln SUV, pulled up behind her, and 13 minutes later, only the minivan pulled away. No way to tell who got out. But a grainy still from the SUV's dash revealed a bumper sticker, a faded American flag with a gold badge. Tony DeSpirito used to drive a black Lincoln. Brian visited his father in his quiet suburban home. No cameras. No reporters. Just the two of them. He showed him the still image. The Lincoln. The bumper sticker. The timestamp. Daniel looked away. "You knew he was there," Brian said. "You let him follow her." Daniel's hands trembled. "I didn't know what he'd do. I told him just to scare her. He wasn't supposed to hurt anyone." Brian's voice cracked. "You sent your own wife and daughter into a van with a man who makes people disappear." Daniel looked up, eyes wet. "He said if I didn't, he'd come after you next." Kelly found something else. 2 other suspicious accidents connected to Tony DeSpirito. In 2003, a bookkeeper for another drywall company died in a car crash after reporting tax fraud. In 2006, a contractor who filed a lawsuit against Tony fell off a roof. No witnesses. Both deaths were ruled accidents. Both victims had left behind notes expressing fear. Neither case was ever reopened. Until now. With mounting evidence, the Department of Justice quietly opened a federal racketeering investigation into Tony DeSpirito and the shell companies linked to Schuler and Company. Federal agents raided Tony's mansion in May 2025. They found burner phones, offshore bank accounts, and a notebook, one that listed names, amounts, and initials. One page read, "This 50K hush. D.Shu 25K. 10K gone. D.Schuler dead. Mistake." Underneath it, written in red, "BS watching." Brian moved into a safe house after receiving a handwritten note shoved under his windshield wiper. "Enough. Walk away, or you'll end up like her." That night, his house was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but a vodka bottle was placed on his kitchen table. Half empty, like the one Diane supposedly drank from. Tony hasn't been charged with Diane's death yet, but the DOJ now considers it a murder disguised as a crash. Brian knows this goes deeper. He knows the rot didn't stop with his family. It spread into banks, unions, politicians, people who needed Diane silenced. The only person who knew the whole story? Diane's therapist. Someone she called the night before she died. And that woman? Hasn't been seen in over a decade. Before Diane Schuler drove her minivan the wrong way down the Taconic, she made one last phone call. Not to her husband. Not to her brother, but to a woman who knew all her secrets. Her therapist. A woman who disappeared 2 days after the crash. August 2009, 2 days after the crash. Dr. Melinda Rowe didn't answer the phone that day. She was supposed to meet a colleague for brunch in White Plains. She never showed. When police conducted a welfare check, they found her townhouse empty. Her keys were still in the ignition. Her wallet, phone, and laptop were missing. But her dog was still inside, unfed, unattended. At the time, her disappearance was chalked up to a suicide, possibly spurred by emotional fallout from Diane's death. Dr. Rowe had worked closely with Diane for 3 years, treating her for anxiety, depression, and, reportedly, postpartum trauma. No body was ever found. Case closed. But Kelly Rojas wasn't so easily convinced. Brian's legal team gained access to Diane's subpoenaed phone records from the week leading up to the crash. One call, timestamped 10:37 p.m. the night before the accident, stood out. Call placed to Dr. Rowe. Duration, 4 minutes, 52 seconds. The contents of that call had never been released publicly. But through a court order, Kelly obtained a digital copy of Diane's voicemail backup from her phone provider's cloud service. One file stood out, labeled RB.wave. It's Diane. I need to talk to you. Something's happening. I messed up. Not just with Dan or Mike. It's bigger than that. There's someone else. He said if I talk, they'll come after Brian. After the kids. I don't know what to do. They found out I kept the documents. I thought I was being careful. But someone followed me today. A black SUV. I can't breathe. If something happens to me, tell Brian I tried to protect them. Please call me back. While looking through Dr. Rowe's medical license registry, Kelly noticed something odd. Although Melinda Rowe's license was never officially revoked, it was marked inactive in 2010. But in 2012, a psychologist with a nearly identical educational background applied for a new license in Colorado, under the name Melissa Crane. Same graduation year. Same internship history. Same signature handwriting on the license renewal. Kelly cross-referenced property records and discovered a cabin in Aspen, registered to Crane Therapeutics LLC. And guess who had wired $75,000 to that LLC from an offshore account in 2010? Diane Schuler. Kelly flew to Colorado under the radar and staked out the cabin. And after 3 days, Dr. Melinda Rowe walked out the front door. She'd changed her hair, wore glasses now, but it was her. Kelly confronted her on a trail near her home. At first, Dr. Rowe denied everything. But when Kelly played the voicemail, she stopped walking. She turned pale. And then she said one word. He made me disappear. Melinda agreed to a private interview on camera, under the condition her location and identity remained secret until legal protections were in place. Here's what she revealed. Diane had discovered bank fraud, payroll fraud, and something far worse, contracts connected to illegal labor from Eastern Europe, funneled through fake job sites and buried inside drywall company operations. She'd taken copies of the files. She was planning to go to the state labor board and the media. She had told Dr. Rowe everything. And 2 days later, Melinda received a manila envelope at her office. Inside, photos of her mother, her sister, and her dog, taken through a zoom lens. That night, Daniel called her. They want you out. If you want to live, pack a bag. You'll get a ticket. You'll never speak about Diane again. And she did exactly that. Melinda revealed something else. Diane wasn't just scared for herself. She believed that someone in law enforcement was involved. A corrupt officer who had been tipped off about her investigation and was erasing evidence behind the scenes. She had said his name in passing, Officer Bright. And in a chilling twist, Officer James Bright was the first responder to the Taconic crash scene in 2009. He'd since retired early and now owns a security firm in New Jersey, contracting with government offices. The same firm that had been monitoring Kelly's location for weeks without her knowledge. Just days after Melinda's confession, Brian received a USB drive in an unmarked envelope. It contained dashcam footage from inside a car parked across the street from his house. In it, Brian is seen walking to his mailbox. A voice whispers from behind the camera. She wasn't the only one who needed to be silenced. But you're next. Kelly is now under federal protection. Dr. Melinda Rowe is in witness custody. Brian is preparing to testify before a grand jury. And Tony DeSpirito? He's vanished from federal holding. The guards claimed it was a transfer. But no one knows where he is. No paperwork. No logs. Gone. Just like Diane. Just like Melinda almost was. The next part of the story goes all the way to the top. The lies are unraveling. The witnesses are speaking. And the truth about Diane Schuler's death has clawed its way out of the grave. But some monsters don't die quietly, and justice always demands blood. A week before the grand jury convened, an anonymous source delivered a cassette tape to Kelly Rojas. Inside was a secret recording, muffled, grainy, but unmistakable. Tony DeSpirito's voice. It was supposed to be clean. A warning, not a massacre. But she fought back. That woman had fire in her. Would have taken all of us down. So we made it look like she cracked. Left the bottle. Moved the bodies. Planted the drugs. The cop cleaned up the scene. Done deal. Diane was too good. Too smart. And too damn dangerous. This was it. The smoking gun. Federal prosecutors dropped the hammer in December 2025. Charges were filed for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, financial fraud, and racketeering against Daniel Schuler, 20 years without parole. Mike Russo, 15 years, plea deal for cooperation. Officer James Bright, 25 years for tampering with evidence, witness intimidation, and perjury. Multiple city officials, including a judge and 2 detectives with ties to Tony's union contracts. But Tony DeSpirito? Still gone. He had disappeared from federal custody. And the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. He'd been pulled out by someone inside. A federal mole. His reach had gone higher than anyone imagined. What really happened that day? With testimony from Dr. Melinda Rowe, Brian Schuler, and FBI analysts, the story finally came together. Diane had discovered a multimillion-dollar fraud ring tied to undocumented labor, tax evasion, and construction kickbacks. The paper trail implicated powerful people, including Tony. She tried to confront Daniel. He panicked and went to Tony. Tony sent 2 men to intimidate Diane the morning of the crash. She pulled into a rest area to try and talk them down. But something went wrong. One of them struck her. Possibly injected her. The plan was to scare her into silence, not kill her. But she fought back. In the chaos, her niece Emma was injured. Diane tried to drive for help, confused, bleeding, possibly drugged. She entered a dissociative state. The trauma, the injuries, and a toxic combination of fear and chemicals in her body made her lose control. When she pulled onto the Taconic the wrong way, she wasn't trying to die. She was running, trying to get away. The crash killed 8 people, including Diane Schuler, her daughter Erin, her 3 nieces, the 3 men in the SUV, Michael Bastardi, his son Guy, and friend Daniel Longo. All of them died not because of Diane, but because of a cover-up, because of men who wanted her silent, because the truth threatened profit. At the final hearing, Brian Schuler took the stand. His voice shook, but he stood tall. They called her a monster. They called her a drunk. But my aunt, my mother, was a whistleblower, the fighter. She died trying to save her children. They stole her voice. But they will not bury her name. The courtroom was silent. Not a dry eye in the gallery. 2 months after the sentencing, Brian received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed a man sitting on a beach in Malta, reading a newspaper. It was Tony DeSpirito. On the back of the photo, written in sharp black ink, "You won, but I'm still watching." Diane Schuler's name has been cleared. New York reopened multiple cold cases tied to construction site accidents and union-linked deaths. A documentary called "She Tried to Warn Us" is in development, led by Kelly Rojas and Brian. The Taconic State Parkway crash will never be forgotten. Not as a freak accident, not as a mother who snapped, but as the moment a brave woman stood up to corruption and died for it. They tried to destroy her, but now the world knows the truth. Aunt Diane didn't lose control. She was silenced. But a note is left on screen. This story is based on real events and inspired by a true tragedy. In memory of those lost on July 26, 2009.